What's up, everybody? I am Charlie Marlow. That is the great Rick Mast. This is the Rick Mast Show. How's everybody doing? And more importantly, Rick, how are you doing?
Again, Charlie, if I was any better, I don't know what I would do with myself. I really don't. I know that's the answer I give you every week, but that's the way I feel, dude.
That's beautiful. That's the answer I want you to give me. I don't want one of these days for you to say, "Oh, I'm terrible. I'm in a terrible mood. Everything sucks." I like the positivity, Rick.
No, man, you learn in racing. I mean, racing in NASCAR as a cup driver, it will beat you to the ground and stomp on you and chew you out and spit you out, man. And you learn, or I did at least through all those years of how to reconcile the bad things with the good things, and you really finally you learn that you do everything you can do, and everything else is out of your control, and you're still here. You're still here on Earth. God still has a plan for you, so you're here, make the best of it, be happy. That's kind of what I do. That's my motto.
I love it. That's a good motto. That's the right motto. All right, let's talk about Sonoma. What I found really interesting, not just about the race, but then also in the post-race press conferences is, and this is mostly coming from Cliff Daniels, obviously the winning crew chief of Kyle Larson. He said basically the strategy going in with the repave, everybody was worried about the tires. And he kind of said nobody expected so many cautions that it totally threw everybody's strategy into the garbage. And they basically were all kind of doing it on the fly, which he thought was pretty fun. So give us your take there. I guess it's kind of cool when basically all these teams have to just ad lib.
Yeah, it was a little bit like Bristol. Remember Bristol
Mhm.
early in the year when the tires were falling off after 20 laps and blowing out? Well, this deal, they weren't blowing out, but everything that went on at that track, again, what Cliff said was exactly right. But what it did, it led, and everything, whenever these guys have to ad lib, right, and do it on the fly, it always ends up being the best type of racing because, the things are not set. They keep getting curveballs thrown at them and they don't know exactly what to do, and that got all these guys on, their pit sequences were different, all day. You're trying to figure out, all right, if you're following Chase Elliott, you look up one time he's leading and 2 laps later he's 18th, right? And then you're watching all that go as the race goes on, it progresses, and you're like, man, how's this going to end up? How's it going to work out? And to me, it made for a very exciting event. I mean, they had good racing also. The cars, I was pretty proud of the way the cars had to race each other. Those guys were pretty tight. There's a lot of side by side racing, a lot of passes going on. To me, it was just one of the more exciting road courses we've had in a long time. Probably the most exciting to me that we've had in a long time. And some of it had to do with the repave, some of it had to do with the unknowns, some of it had to do with the tire that they were using, and some of it had to do with the new car. So that's the way I took it.
Yeah, not a ton of drama after this one, although a little bit with Kyle Busch and Ross Chastain. And
Yeah.
I know I'm a big fan of Kyle Busch. It's hard to feel sorry for Kyle Busch because he's so successful. He's won so many races and he's got 2 championships, but man, he's got some crap luck lately.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the bad part about that, Charlie? I didn't even know about it. I didn't even know that had happened till later. On social media, they had clips of Chastain getting into Bush and wrecking him, right? And I'm like, where was the television during it? Where was our TV broadcast when this went on, right? Why, how in the heck did we miss that? Why didn't we talk about it? And, it's kind of like, it was kind of like the Xfinity race Saturday is when, who was it took out? Oh, the winner took out Austin Hill, basically made the
Mhm.
pass for the win. Austin Hill, he catches so much grief from everybody because he's come across as a whiner, as all these social media people say about him. Whether he is or whether he isn't, I don't know, but he's kind of got that stigma. So, when they interviewed him, I thought it was cool. He said, I'm not going to say anything because whatever I say is going to be wrong, right? And that comes from all the grief he catches on social media when he fusses about that stuff. And of course, he brings some of that on himself. And the deal with Bush, Bush just got through with the deal, last week, and having trouble, and the fight he had a couple weeks ago. So I guess he just, he took his beating, he took his lumps. I guess got in his truck and went home, right, and didn't get into it. But that was a pretty bad dump. I mean, I'm a Ross Chastain fan, man. I love him. I've met him, talked to him. personally. He's a good dude. I love talking to that guy. He's like a throwback. And people in the garage tell me he's kind of like a throwback, right? A little bit of old school in him. But he just flat dumped Bush. He dumped him, whether he knew to do it. He said he didn't know what he was doing and didn't know what had happened and all that. And he's probably being true, right? But to miss that, I didn't like that we missed that on TV, but it was still a good deal. And man, I was sitting there thinking about Truex when he limped across the line. As everybody knows, it was a straight gear transmission car. You put it in gear and hit the starter button, and it moves the car. I was thinking, well, I wonder if the battery's going to run dead before he gets to start-finish line, but he got there anyhow. And good Lord of mercy, you talk about Truex, and I'm like, man, how can anybody, they run so good with no results. It's the darndest thing with that team. But last year, they were on fire. Then they got to the playoffs and they went to junk. So maybe this year it's kind of like my Braves. We're junk right now, but we're waiting for the playoffs. Maybe we're waiting to the end, or get down to the end. So maybe Truex luck will change on this deal. Swap this year. Maybe he'll win the championship. I don't know. But anyhow, the bottom line is Sonoma excited me. It was a good deal.
Okay, I feel like every time Denny Hamlin wins a race, we always bring up the narrative of, oh, is he going to win the championship this year? Is this his year? And I feel like every time Kyle Larson wins a race, which is a lot, we have that conversation or narrative about, is he the best, not just NASCAR driver? Could he be the best race car driver on earth? And especially coming off a couple weeks ago, Indy 500, had a chance to win. What did he do? He finished 18th, but I'll start it like this. Do you think, okay, so we have Kyle Busch, 2 championships. We have Joey Logano, 2 championships. We have other champions. Do you think Kyle Larson is the best NASCAR driver out there right now?
Could be. He could very well be. And if you just pigeonhole it to NASCAR, there's a case to be made. If all he was doing is running NASCAR, nothing else, and having the results he's having, yeah, he's a pretty damn good driver. He's a good driver, right? But I think all the extra stuff he does, all this other racing he does, makes him seem as a better NASCAR driver, if that makes sense to you. And then we go into the conversation, is he one of the best drivers ever in the world for racing, just a race car driver? Well, you've got to start putting him in those conversations with AJ Foyt and Mario Andretti. I mean, I don't know of 2 drivers that did more than those 2. What I mean by that, you get in something that has 4 wheels, not just a stock car or an Indy car or a sprint car or a dirt car or a Formula One car, right? You put those guys in those cars and they win. Of course, AJ didn't do F1, right? And he had his reasons for not doing F1, and that's pretty funny. But if he had been in F1, I'm sure he'd have won just like Mario did, because those guys were pretty equal in everything they did. Smoke comes along. Tony Stewart comes along. He does this deal. Of course, he came up a little bit. He was in Indy cars before he got into Cup cars, so he was very good at that. Did well in IndyCar, did well in stock cars, did well in sprints, did well in late models and dirt. But then here Larson comes along, and the time we're in, the what we're in right now with racing, and what he's doing and what he does and the way he just hops in anything. If he doesn't win, he puts on a show. He's going to be up front. Kyle Larson, to me, and this is a very big statement, because I don't make statements like this, and people shouldn't make these kind of statements, but he's in the conversation of AJ Foyt and Mario Andretti as one of the best race car drivers, period, in any kind of race car. Again, we go back to just strictly NASCAR. If Kyle wasn't racing anything but NASCAR, we wouldn't know how good he is at all this other stuff. Okay. But he would be a prolific winner. He is a prolific winner, and he definitely be in the top 10 NASCAR drivers that ever was, right? There's no doubt about that. Got a ways to go to get all that solidified, but he's on the path to be spoken of in those terms in my mind.
Okay, I don't know the story. So why didn't AJ Foyt run Formula One?
Bunch of pansies. That's a bunch of pansies over there running that stuff. A bunch of egomaniac pansies. Okay. I'm trying to think of the verbiage Mario or AJ used with me, but in that day, in that time period, the lifestyle or the type the type. It didn't fit AJ's style. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha.
It didn't fit his mold.
Okay. So we're going to do probably a couple story times, but I thought this was interesting. You brought up the other day Austin Hill with SVG, Shane Van Gisbergen. And so I saw this tweet, so I had to ask Rick Mast. I'm going to read it for you here.
Okay.
It says, with 2 straight wins, Shane Van Gisbergen is the 8th driver in Xfinity Series history to win their first 2 races back-to-back. SVG joins Rick Mast, Steve Grissom, Chad Little, Jamie McMurray, Chase Elliott, William Byron, and Austin Cindric on that list. Rick, that's a pretty dang good list to be on. So tell us the story of that. Your first 2 Xfinity wins, or what was it, Busch Series back then?
Yes.
Come back to back.
Yeah, we were a mainstay in the Busch Series, and we weren't really funded properly and all that, and everything we did was on our own. We self-taught, did our own stuff, all that. And we had a lot of good. We were racing really well. We had fast race cars doing really well, and couldn't secure a victory. Man, it just for whatever reasons we just couldn't secure that. And we go to Dover. This is in 1987, and we go to Dover, a Busch race, and we win that race. Car was pretty good. The car was pretty dominant towards the end of the race. And then, we load up, we go to Martinsville the next week, and one of my favorite tracks, and we go up there, man, and we dust their butts there, right? We win the race. The funny part of all that, Charlie, I had tried my best. I mean, I was a politician too, man. I had talked to everybody trying to get help, right? I talked to manufacturers. I talked to Goodyear. I talked to everybody. Well, and everybody knew me. I'd written letters, I did little pamphlets, did all kinds of stuff, tried to get some help from somebody, just to help our team. We won Dover. We go to Martinsville. We win that race. And within a couple of weeks, I've got a manufacturer deal with Buick. Okay. I've got a tire deal with Goodyear that's provided you so many free tires. I get a shock deal from Pro Shocks, right? We get free shocks. And I don't know, 2 or 3 other things, but they were the major hitters at that point. And I'm like, oh, this is what you got to do to get free crap. You got to win, right? It's like, yeah, all you got to do is win and you get this stuff. So that was pretty cool. I mean, and it was very rewarding because so many people congratulated us. And in those days, we all were like a traveling circus, and you were happy when your fellow competitor, had success. And I remember that those couple of weeks and all the guys that I raced against, and some guys I'd be mad at, right? Some guys we'd have troubles with, but they'd all come up and genuinely wish you or tell you good wishes, right? And they truly meant it. But those were the 2 things that came out of those 2 back-to-back victories in those days. It was pretty cool.
Okay, so we also asked for some questions for you on Twitter, and we got a few. So I'm going to read you 2 of them because they're kind of the same question, and I think it pertains to what you said earlier about. Well, you were talking about the Busch Series at the time not being well funded, but here I'll just read them for you. So here's the first one. Rick, this is from Matt Miles. Rick, despite being teammates with Harry Gant, the 1 in 33 were truly separate teams. What was that dynamic like? And could the Jackson boys have gotten a jump with Hendrick if y'all shared a little more information? And then this next question I think is kind of similar, which is from the dumb trucker is his name.
Okay.
He says,
I love that.
Rick, you stayed loyal to Richard Jackson and that one car for so many years. Did you have any offers from other teams that you turned down and looking back, wished you hadn't? So there you go.
Yeah. To back up and explain this to the audience, in those days, 2 brothers, Richard Jackson, Leo Jackson, both very well respected in the racing industry. They had late model cars and Busch Grand National cars, that different folks drove. Bob Presley, Tom Ellis, a lot of that. Well, Skoll basically came in, and in '89 they came in and started sponsoring Harry Gant. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. They've been sponsoring Harry Gant with Travis Carter and Hal Needham. When that team broke up, that sponsorship went to Leo Jackson, and Harry Gant drove for him. About the same time, Skoll also decided they would sponsor Richard Jackson and his drivers. So I think I think it was Terry. Well, I know the year before I got to Skull was Terry Labonte drove the one car. Then it started in '91. I drove the one car. So all through those years, I drove for Richard Jackson. And you got to understand, Skull was they weren't the top money. They weren't the top money sponsor, but they were adequate. You could do very well with Skull as a sponsorship. But the neat part about it, Skull was just U.S. Tobacco, they were just such a good group. They were a good sponsor. They were a fun group to be around. They're very loyal people. I'll never forget Lou Bannell. Lou Bannell was CEO of the company. He was the man. He was in charge. And all the years I drove for him, the only thing Lou Bannell ever asked of me and Harry was, what can I do to help y'all? Right? He's like, the way he did his marketing and the way they did that thing, Lou told me one time, he said, Rick, if you and Harry win on Sunday, that's just icing on the cake because we've already gotten out of what we wanted to get. And basically what they do would be prime shelf space. They trade off with 7-Elevens and, the Magic Markets of the world, Circle K's and all that. They would trade off associate sponsorship for shelf space, prime shelf space for the products and all that. But anyhow, they were cool. So you have that dynamic of Skull sponsoring both of these teams. Richard had his race team there in Denver, North Carolina, which is near Mooresville. Leo Jackson kept his team in Asheville, okay? And they were two completely separate teams. There was no information shared between us, Andy Petrie was a crew chief on Harry's car. In the first year I had Bob Johnson. Then I had Kevin Hamlin the rest of the career at Skull. And it's like the year that Harry won all those races. I forget which year it was, Mr. September. Well, they had figured out early about camber in the rear end, putting camber in the rear end with these radial tires. And I'll tell you where that came from. Skull used to take us in the winter. They take us to places in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. I mean, in the summer, they take us to places in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. In the winter, we go to West Palm Beach, Florida. They had these big mansions, right? It would be me. It'd be all the drivers. It'd be me, AJ Foyt, Harry Gant, Don the Snake Perdome. It'd be all of our wives. It'd be Johnny Hayes, our boss. It'd be Lou Bannell and his wife. It'd be the president of the company, CFO of the company. It'd be a bunch of us. And we'd all just sit there for a week and golf in decadence, okay? I mean, you get served and waited on and meals and just on and on and on. And it's a very comfortable, relaxed atmosphere. So, that's how you get to know everybody real well. And I remember when we went to Radial Tires, sitting there one time, and all of us were talking, and AJ says, I'll tell you one thing about Radial Tires, because he was used to them on the Indy side. You can't run the tire on the edge. That tire doesn't like to be on the edge. And the edge, I mean, like looking back is like out of camber. You didn't have your camber right, and you're on the actual corner of the tire, right? So what happens? Leo's sitting there listening to that. He goes back and he gets to ciphering. We call it ciphering, thinking about that. And anyhow, they come up with putting camber in the rear tires, okay, the rear end. And they were the first to do that. And they won a lot of races on that. But that's how smart Leo was. He figured that out from that conversation that day. But we never knew about it. Okay, that information wasn't shared to the one team, right? It just wasn't. But Richard and Leo, their relationship with each other was a very, very good, loving, respectful relationship. If one asked the other for something, they would help. Okay, if Richard went to Leo and said, "Leo, what are you doing that's letting you win these races?" Leo would tell him. Okay, it was that kind of relationship. But those guys, it was kind of weird the way they did the racing thing. They kept it separated. And to his point, the questionaire's point, yeah, between Leo and Richard, because both of them were engineers. Richard had his engineering degree, and Leo had that shop and does all that fancy stuff he'd make for race car motors and stuff. those two guys were brilliant individually. Together, it would have been a force. It would have been a very strong force if those two minds were put together with one team to run, 2 or 3 race cars. It would have been I don't know if it had been a Hendrick type deal, but it would have been a very, very, very strong race team, very, very dynamic, strong race team for a long time. But the way it was set up, it just didn't happen, So, and then the part, Charlie, about was I offered rides and turned them down. I had to think about that a little bit. When I saw that question, I started my mind thinking about it. I actually had to write it down, okay, to remember all of it. I still don't know if I got it all remembered, but I did write down what I did remember. Yeah, that happened quite a few times. The problem is that I go through these, I'll tell you, and you're going to be like, what the hell's wrong with you? Well, I can look back at all these decisions I made at the time, and it felt like the right decision when I made them. Looking back now from a 10,000 area view, a 10,000 foot view, career wise, they were just dumb decisions. Okay. But I don't regret any of it. I don't look back, but that's just the way I am. When I make a decision about something, I do it, I put it behind me and go on. Because if you were to look at it like, you really screwed up, you should have did this and that, well, hell, you want to commit suicide. But, I've never been that mindset, because each time when I made these decisions, I thought it was the right one at the time for the various reasons. But let me see, probably the first one, excuse me, Johnny Hayes, we've talked about here many times. Johnny Hayes ran Skoal. He was the boss of Skoal. He hired and fired the drivers and all that. Johnny Hayes came to me one time. He said, Rick, I said, yeah, Johnny, you going to drive for Robert Yates? I said, no. Why? You're not going to drive for Robert Yates? I said, no. Were you going to try to tell me you haven't talked to him? I said, I thought to myself, how'd you know that? I said, yeah, I've talked to him. But you're not going to drive for him. I said, no. He said, what the hell's wrong with you? Why not? Right. But, and I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I think it was during, I think it's when we lost Davey. It's somewhere between when we lost Davey and Ernie got hurt. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I was with Skoal during that time. So, that was an opportunity turned down that, may have turned out differently.
So real quick. So
Yeah.
which car would you have potentially
28.
gotten? And then who got into that car instead?
Well, if it's when we lost Davey, it's when Ernie got in it. Okay. Because he was with the 4 car then. And I think that's when it was, right? I don't think it was when Ernie got hurt. It may have been when Ernie got hurt. I honestly, that's the one I was thinking about it again this morning, and I cannot remember what that time frame was.
Okay.
I just remember the big deal with Johnny. And here's the neat part. Robert had called Johnny Hayes and asked permission to talk to me.
Okay.
Right. And Johnny didn't tell me that for a long time. Right. Because I kept saying, how the hell did you know that? Because that was very confidential. And he finally admitted to me that Robert had called and asked permission. So, there is honor among thieves. Okay. I mean, I thought, that was looking back, especially in that time period, that was a pretty cool deal from Robert Yates to go to Johnny Hayes and ask permission.
So why did you stay then?
Loyalty to Skoal. I felt, I really felt that, this team, I don't know, they gave him a first shot. I had worked so hard to get the Cup, and Skoal went out on a limb or whatever that you wouldn't say on a limb, but they hired me. Okay. They gave me my first shot at this. And I just didn't feel like that early in the tenure with them that was the right thing to do at the time, to walk away from it, because, I had formed good relationships with my team members, an awesome relationship with US Tobacco and Skoal and all those folks. And it just didn't feel right to me to leave those folks. It just didn't, so that's the reason I didn't do it. Barney Hall, the great Barney Hall that everybody remembers, he was, the MRN broadcaster that could make you said, man, you could sit there and listen to the race with Barney on the radio, and I swear you could smell the rubber burning on those tires if you listened to Barney Hall. He was that great. But anyhow, Barney was Junior's guy. All right. Whenever Junior was going to make a move, or at least the ones I knew about, Barney was the front man. Barney and Barney was one of those guys with that media set in those days that you trusted 100%. You could tell Barney anything, like, Tom Higgins and all those guys. But Barney approached me about driving for Junior. Okay. And I turned that down, and it was past the Yates deal. I'm not sure when, but Again, at that point, I felt like, we could still maybe make this thing work and be a real good deal at Skull. Okay. And that kind of did that. So then we move on. And then when the Skull deal goes away with the government dropping out, stopping the tobacco sponsorship and all that, I moved to Butch Mock and the Remington team. The worst 2 years of my life, the worst 2 years, probably the most aggravating, the most miserable. Yeah, in my whole career, from the time I was dirt racing at 15 to I ended, those were the two most miserable years. And it wasn't because of the people. Butch Mock was a great guy. He had the team guys were great guys. We all got along well. Remington was a fantastic sponsor. They were always doing stuff. They were very proactive. And it was neat for me because with Skull, we had to be very buttoned up on everything. I couldn't even mention Skull on a radio interview, right? And you couldn't sell merchandise to kids. You couldn't do anything with Skull because of the laws and the tobacco industry and all that. So when I went to Remington, it was complete opposite, man. They would blow everything out of the water. I mean, me and Earnhardt, we did a couple commercials together for Remington. I did a bunch of hunting outdoor shows with associate sponsors. And we had Polaris and hunting Mossy Oak. We did a lot of TV stuff, a lot of stuff we did for those 2 years. It was great. The problem was we ran like crap. We just ran like crap, and there were reasons for that. And, he brought a couple of people in trying to help the thing, but, it just wasn't meant to be. And I caught a lot of grief in that time period because, you weren't running well, so, what's the problem? Is it the driver? Well, when I left that team the next year after that, Ted came in and drove the car, Musgrave, and, he ran about like I did, which I figured is what was going to happen. But again, very good people. But during that time period, let me look here at my thing. When I agreed to drive for Butch, we were at Darlington. Jack Rouse comes up to me and says, "Rick, what are you doing next year?" I said, "I'm driving for Butch Mock." He said, "Have you signed a contract?" I says, "No, not yet." He said, "Well, you're not driving yet." I said, "Well, I've given my word." He says, "Well, I want to talk to you about driving for me." And he says, "The reason I'm doing this is partly me, but mainly Mark Martin. Mark Martin told me to go out and get Rick Mast to get in this race car, right?" And we talked a little bit, and I hadn't signed the contract because Jack pushed me pretty hard on this one. Okay, he pressured me pretty hard. I didn't. It's because I hadn't signed the contracts, but I had given my word. I shook hands with Butch. Already talked to the Remington people. Right, it was all set in stone. Looking back, you don't know what would have happened. I know I'd have run better going with Jack and a lot of the things that I was going through and wanted to do with cars and all. And what we did with the 75 car for 2 years, it's kind of hampered in what I'd like to do, and things that need to be done. And I felt like if I'd have went to Roush, maybe it would have worked out better. But who knows about that? But I gave my word at the time, so we didn't do that. While I was with the 75 team those 2 years, the Petties, this was through Chuck Spicer, their PR guy. They had a chance to drive for the Petties. Okay, didn't do that. The deal. Well, let's put it this way. At the end, I had a 3-year deal with Butch Mock. I did 2 years and left. But at the end of the first year, when I had this offer, I talked to the Remington guy, okay? And I said, "I'm thinking about doing this. I really have hopes that, I love you guys, and I really have hopes that we could turn this thing around." I said, "But I have an opportunity to do this, to leave and do another deal. What's your thoughts?" He said, "Rick, well, if you do," he said, "we're going to pull out sponsorship." And I said, "Well, yeah, but you're signed for another 2 years, dude." He says, "No, we have outs. There's a bunch of outs." And he put, "We have to approve the driver. And if you leave, we're not going to approve any driver." Right. So I'm sitting there thinking, all right, if I pull out and do this, they're going to shut the sponsorship off. And I've formed this relationship with all these guys. There's going to be 20 or 30 guys here in one day. They don't have jobs. Right. I'm not going to be responsible for all these guys losing their job the day I leave. And Looking back, who knows? But that would have happened. But in that moment with me, with Rick Mast, hell, I can't do this. I can't do this. And there was that hope. There was that hope that we could turn this thing around, right? And then the next year, we were at New Hampshire, and Bill was running two teams. He had his McDonald's team, and he had his other team. I forget who the sponsor was, but he came to me. We were at New Hampshire, and I don't remember what the problem was, but Bill basically put it on me pretty hard, trying to get me to leave and come with him and his second team at that point, and I didn't do it at that point, and that's probably a deal I think would have worked well for me. Looking back, I think that thing would have worked pretty well, driving for Bill with the stuff that I kind of knew what was going on, but I couldn't get done with my car and my team, and that was probably one of the big ones. And then, other things that didn't work out, like Richard came to me one time. We wanted to do a third team, Richard Childress, and that was looking pretty promising, and it fell through. It didn't happen with his sponsorship, and some stuff with Travis Carter and the Kmart car, and different things. But that's kind of what I went through in that time period. And again, I have no regrets. I know. Had I done different things or did one of those other moves, I know probably the stats on Rick Mast would be different, right? But at the moment, each reason I had for not making a move is something that I stand by today. Looking back, I would do the exact same thing. I know my personality and who I am and what I do. So that was the major hitters. Okay, had other things going on. You're always in conversations and other things happening, but they were probably the major hitters through that whole time period of me in Cup racing.
Okay, you gave some great examples of to why you didn't move and protecting other guys' jobs and whatnot. I'm curious, specifically, potentially with Roush, how did the money factor play a factor? And I ask because just recently, there's kind of a viral clip you probably saw because Mark Martin was on the Dale Jr. Download recently, and Mark Martin tells this story where whatever year it was, he had a really good year. He said, blood, sweat, and tears. He's working on the car. He's doing everything. I think he had a pretty successful year, and he said he made like $225,000 in that particular year. So he was kind of saying like, "Hey, I'm doing pretty well, and I'm doing a lot, and I'm not making enough money here."
Yeah. So what's the question?
Is that true, or did that ever play a big factor for you?
It really didn't. It really didn't. I mean, the deal was Skull. I'll be honest with you. The first year in 1991, I signed my contract with Skull, and it was a $50,000 salary and 50% of the purse and all my expenses paid. Well, hell, that's more money than I'd ever seen in my life for driving a race car, right? And as time went on, each year that got upped, right, to where I think when I finally got with the Remington car, my base salary was like I think it was $750 the first year. Okay, then it went up, I think, to $850 the second year. And but the money part was, to me, was always like secondary. That's what came from what you did. If you're a good race car driver and you can perform and do well, then you would get paid for that. You know what I'm saying? It would go up. By that time period, there were guys making a lot more than me, right? And there were guys that weren't making anything compared to me, right? So, but I never did, I never did let that. And one of those situations, I think I was offered money was kind of a deal, thrown out there at me, and it's still, you could have given me. Well, you'd offer me 10 million. Yeah, I'd probably, all right, guys, I'll pay for you. If y'all ain't got jobs, I'll pay for you for a while, right? You know what I mean? But yeah, it was never a factor. It just never was.
All
With
right, and then
me.
another thing I picked up on, you said you did some commercials for Remington with Dale Earnhardt. So, any stories from those, and or also who was the better actor, you or him?
Oh, me. Oh yeah, I was better at all of it, man. I was a lot better than him. we did a 2-day shoot one time outside of Charlotte on somebody's farm, and I tell you, I know why actors and actresses and all get on drugs while they go on drugs, because we did a 2-day shoot for a 30-second commercial, right? It took 2 days. We would set up and we'd shoot whatever we're doing, right? Film whatever we're doing. Then you would stop and you sit there for 2 hours waiting on to do the next scene, right? And but they had a lot of stuff going on. They had skeet throwers. They had a skeet thrower set up. They had some shooting range stuff set up, and so we were always shooting. You know, when the production film crew was over there setting up the next scene or whatever, me and Dale would be over there shooting skeets, shooting targets, and they had 2 motorhomes set up down there. And Sharon, my wife, was with me, and Ricky was with me, and Dale actually had Teresa with him. Okay, and they would go down at the motorhomes. That's where they'd be sitting in the motorhomes doing their thing while we were doing this commercial. Well, the first day, Dale kept trying to get Teresa to come up there and shoot, right? And she would never do it. And the second day of the shooting, he kept hollering down there, Teresa, come up here. And she would never do it. Finally, he said, Teresa, get your ass up here and shoot. Well, Teresa comes up there, and we're shooting skeets, right? And I never forget, they threw 10 birds out, and clays, and she knocked 9 of them down. And I'm like, damn, what in the world? And Dale had been telling me that she was real good. She's a good shot. And I looked at Teresa, good Lord, Teresa. She said, well, I haven't really shot anything in about 10 years. I said, where'd you learn to do this? She said, well, Daddy taught me. Hal Houston's her dad. Tommy Houston, the great Tommy Houston, right? Tommy is Hal's brother. And Hal was Teresa's daddy. Okay. But anyhow, she knocked those things. And I remember looking at Dale. So I know why you don't ever mess up, boy. She'll shoot your ass. She'll kill you. So that's why you're pretty straight. But it was a neat commercial because Ricky was in it, my son. You pull up this whole thing, it's probably still on YouTube. And Taylor, Dale and Teresa's daughter, Taylor, they were in it. They had roles in it at the end. It's a pretty cool commercial. And they had just come out. What this commercial was about was a 5.22 rifle, the Remington Rimfire 5.22. And that's what this commercial was about. Well, during takes, we were doing target shooting. We were shooting shotgun shells off a target from way away. And me and Dale were shooting, and I kept knocking mine off, and he was missing. And he got to cussing. He said, something wrong with the sights on this gun. Give me that gun. So we swapped guns. And I hit right, and he was missing again. He got mad about that because he was a very, very, very competitive dude. But it was a fun 2 day. And here's the neat part about it. Here's the neat part, Charlie. When it's all said and done, Remington said, Rick, you know, how are we going to pay you? What do you want? I said, didn't y'all just come out with a 6-wheeler with a dump bed on the back? Yeah, we did. And this was Polaris. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting this mixed up. I'm sorry. That's a different story. That's the Polaris commercial I did. We'll talk about that. They asked Dale, what, how do we invoice? What do you charge? He says, you guys figure out what you would think you would pay me to do this 2 days of being up here with you people. You figure out how much you'd pay me. Take that check and write it, and you write it to the race team. You give that to Rick Mast race team, right? I thought, damn, that's pretty cool, right? But Dale loved Remington. He loved outdoors and shooting and all. So it was a good fit for him. You know, it was a good deal. And he ended up doing some stuff with Remington later on after that. You know, he became a partial spokesman for him and did some things. And that little deal worked out good for him.
But for that one particularly, he took no money and gave it all to your team?
No, he gave all the money to the team. Yeah. He said, and he may have come up with a number, but I remember him. I was sitting there listening to it. He says, whatever y'all think that y'all should pay me. And he said, and he did say, and if that number's too low, I can tell you what I get to do this for 2 days, right? He said, well, you're going to take that check and you're going to write that to the team. And they did. They wrote a check to Butch Bach Racing for that 2-day deal, right? Which was, but that was Dale. That was Dale. I mean, that's the Dale Earnhardt I knew. Anything to help Rick and anything to help racing, and and him to have fun, enjoy what he was doing. With good, honest folks involved. He loved doing stuff like that.
All right, we have another question. This one's coming from YouTube. So this is from Donna Browder. Kind of a long question. She says, there's some typos in here, so here we go. I'd love to hear some stories about the era when Rick was racing at, I believe it's White Taylor's, Franklin County.
Whitey Taylor.
Whitey Taylor's, Franklin County, Virginia Speedway. Nobody could beat Rick, so Whitey put a bounty on Rick, payable to anyone who could beat him. This fiasco and promotion went on for most or all of a summer season. This is when I became a Rick Mast fan. I followed him to the Busch Series and loved watching him chase the big money in that series with an underfunded team. So at that time, the Busch cars were running V6s with compression ratios so high that the sound would cause pain in your ears. But they want to know, Donna wants to know about this, and I do. So tell me about this bounty. What year was it? How much was the bounty? Was it every Saturday? I mean, did you win them all or what?
1983, we were headed to a race in Hickory, a Busch Grand National race in Hickory. Leaving Lexington, Virginia, going down Interstate 81. Our truck broke down in Troutville, Virginia, which is near Roanoke. Power steering line broke, really, and we stopped at a truck stop. When we finally got this thing fixed, we weren't going to make it to Hickory. It's just too far, right? One of my crew guys had a Roanoke Times newspaper, right, that the great Randy King used to write for, if everybody remembers him. But anyhow, they had an ad in the paper, Franklin County Speedway, 100-lap race, $3,500 to win. Also in that ad, he was going to run, for 3 months, he was going to run a 100-lap race once a month. And if anybody could win all 300-lap races, you win $25,000 bonus. So anyhow, we said, well, we can't make it to Hickory. Let's go to Franklin County. So we go down to Franklin County, and we win the race that night, right? And got our $3,500 and came home. We went back a month later and did the same thing, won that race. Well, Whitey Taylor, for the people that listen to this, know Whitey Taylor, right? He's the definition of P.T. Barnum Bailey, dude. I mean, Humpy Wheeler couldn't wear his shoes. All right, that's kind of how far out there Whitey was. But anyhow, Whitey built this thing up, man. It was the craziest thing. I mean, they had all the TV stations, they had newspapers. I mean, he took this thing. You had to live in that era and understand Whitey and the type of personality, the type of person he was. I mean, the dude is just crazy. He was just absolutely crazy. I think he's still got the track. He's got a thing in Rocky Mountain now. He's got a big Trump store. It's an old church. Right? And Whitey owns it now, and it's all Trump paraphernalia. You've never seen so much Trump stuff in your life, right? But anyhow, then he became a preacher. When he had trouble with the racetrack, he built a church there at the racetrack, and he became a preacher, right? That's just Whitey. But anyhow, all the hoopla, all the stuff, and when we finally got to the event that night, I mean, you couldn't get into the place. The place was packed, sold out. There's an aerial view that I've got from somebody sent me of that race that night before the race, and the cars and the line of cars trying to get into this racetrack, and it's backed up for miles, okay? People hanging up in the trees watching. The craziest thing that this fool tried to do, he called me the week of that final race. He called me on a Wednesday. He said, Rick, yeah, Whitey, you got your car ready? I said, we just finished it up, right? And he knew who my shop was here in Lexington and all that. He says, well, here's what I want you to do. He said, it's ready to go. I said, yeah, it's ready to go. We just finished this on a Wednesday, which is unheard of for a racer to be that close to being ready for the weekend, but we were. He said, I want you to load the car up on your tow truck. I want you to back your truck into your garage, right? And he says, I want you to take the key to the shop, lay it under the mat. I says, okay, what are we going to do then, Whitey? He says, well, I'm going to come up there, or send up there. We're going to come in there, get the key. We're going to open the door. We're going to take your truck and race car, and we're going to take it out of there. And he says, you're going to come in there in the morning, and your race car is going to be stolen. I said, okay. And he says, then you're going to report it, and we're going to blow this thing out. I said, okay, Whitey. So you're going to steal my race car. We're going to let the press know. We're going to let the law know. Where's my race car going to be? Well, I've got a place, again, in Troutville, where all this crap started, right? I've got a garage there. And he says, here's where it's at, blah, blah, blah. And what you're going to do is you're going to come down there Friday evening, and you're going to find your race car in that garage. And then, this thing, it's going to be so blown up by then, and I'm like, Whitey, you're an absolute idiot. You're an idiot, right? Number one, I don't even know if that's legal, which probably isn't. Number two, what if I get down there and my race car and truck ain't there, right? You done stole it or put it somewhere else. I said, No, we're not doing this. We are not doing. That was probably the most absurd thing. And he had all kinds of stuff he's trying to get me to do, right? During that
What
month
else?
period. Well, I
Anything
can't
else?
remember all of it, but that was the most absurd thing, I mean, he brought me in there in a limousine. I had to stop and had to get the limousine to drive into the racetrack and with police, escorts and all this kind of crap. I mean, this dude blew this thing out of the water. And the sad part, we broke a drag link. I mean, a pitman arm. We broke a pitman arm. In those days, I would mess with my steering and geometry and stuff, and my pitman arm was cut and shortened or lengthened or whatever. Anyhow, I broke a pitman arm in that race. Didn't win the race. Well, he decided, because he made so much money, he would give me another shot at it, right? In another month. So he tried to build that thing up and do it all. So we go back the next month and win the race. We get in Victor Lane. He hands me a check for $25,000. Where's that? I said, "Where's my money? Where's my money?" This is Victor Lane. So he writes it. He does a check right there in Victor Lane. He gives to me, and he hands to me. He says, "Rick," he says, "No, don't take this thing to Mike Monday." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I ain't got money enough to cover it." I'm like, "Oh boy." So anyhow, I still got that check, but Whitey spent the next year and a half driving to my office in Lexington, to my shop, and he'd bring his money bags in, and dump these two. He always had two money bags, and he'd dump out 5s and 10s and 20s, right? Hot dog money and gate money, I guess. But he ended up, in a year and a half, he ended up paying me $12,400 of that original 25. Okay. The neat part of the story is, I took that money and went to Banjo Matthews and bought a chassis from Banjo. Okay. And whatever I could piece together, took that car and took it to Robert G. And I'd introduced myself to Robert G. And anyhow, Robert G. put the body on that car for me. Okay. And so the 12.4 that I got from one of those races enabled me to get my first super speedway car. That's a car that I was able to take to Daytona and Darlington and Dover and all those places. So that's kind of how that thing worked out. But it was absolutely ridiculous, with Whitey. I think he takes pride in thinking, I made Rick Mast. Well, no, Whitey, if you'd give me the 25, I could have got made a lot quicker. Okay. But anyhow, it was all fun. It was all good.
Okay. We had somebody else ask about, of course, the first Brickyard, and I know you've told that story many times, and we will have you tell it again. Of course, that one just came up, but here's another one from Nikki Bobby Marks on X. Rick, have you or would you ever try drag racing? Smoke is loving it, as far as I can tell. And a follow up: have you ever been to a drag race? Ever
Yeah.
been or ever considered drag racing?
Yeah. I went to Englishtown one time, and I don't remember. I think it was with a Skull deal when they were sponsored Snake Per Dome, and I went to Englishtown, and I got in somebody's car. It wasn't a full-fledged drag car. It was some kind of, I don't know what it was, but I made 4 or 5 passes. Okay, and I'm like, man, this is pretty fun. You get down to the end, you make that pass, you get down to the end, you're like, well, damn, that's pretty short, right? So then, I remember I went out on the starting grid or starting line, or right out there beside the tree with the big guy. I forget his name now. He was famous. I think his name was Buster, right? And I was standing there with the top fuel cars, a couple top fuel cars. When they took off, man, they hit that thing wide open. It was the damnedest thing. It was like an explosion. I mean, every part of your being vibrated right when they took off. It's like, this is nothing but a controlled explosion, a controlled bomb going off. That's how awesome that was. And that was like, according to those guys, that was like in the 4,000 horsepower era, right? These guys are what, 10 and 11,000 horsepower now? My God Almighty. I mean, I need to go back to one now to see what the difference is, but everybody tells you that's the thrill of NHRA racing, is when those guys light it up, and it's so intense and lightning and deafening and all that. But yeah, yeah, sure, certainly, I'd love to give it a shot. It would. I don't know if it would have satisfied my appetite for racing. You know, because circle track's what I wanted to do, and I always did. It was funny. We talk about these stories of going back with Skoll to these mansions, okay, with all the drivers, and AJ would always rib Snake. You know, they would always those two kind of ribbed each other about stuff. Snake would tell AJ about Mario might be one of the best driver ever. You know, AJ didn't take lightly to that, right? Because AJ's the best driver ever, and AJ would tell Snake about that. What he does is just squirt racing. You know, there's nothing to it. Just sit there and hold it wide open for 3 seconds. There's nothing to, and he wouldn't take that very, very good. But it's funny those two guys always getting on each other about stuff like that. So, but yeah, I would have tried it some.
Very cool. Now, story time with Rick Mast. Did you already? I know you want to talk about the Mark Martin, but we addressed that with the Roush, correct?
No.
Okay. Different story. This is good.
Yeah, and it comes to light. I was thinking about it because we just ran Sears Point. I was thinking about what drivers go through today and what we've all gone through. I'm thinking about the guys at Stewart Haas Racing. I'm thinking about those 4 drivers, and I'm thinking about, you know, I kind of know without knowing them what some of their thoughts and feelings are and what they're going through and trying to work through with their career. And it got me thinking about one time at Sears Point, and this, man, I don't know the year, but very early 90s, you know, early 91, 92 maybe. I'm sitting out on pit row, waiting to qualify, sitting on the pit row wall, and Mark's sitting there with me, and we're talking, and rumors had been flying around that Mark's job was in jeopardy, okay? And because at that point they weren't running good, and that's the first thing that happens. If you're not running good, your job's in jeopardy. That's just the way it goes. That's just natural. Sometimes it has validity, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, and I think that's still true today. But with Mark, we're sitting there talking. He said, and Mark and I were pretty good buddies. We kind of formed a relationship in the Busch Series a little bit, and we get technical with our chassis and stuff, talking about stuff. Anyhow, he got to talking to me, and he said, "Rick, man," he said, "I don't know what's going on." I said, "What's wrong, Mark?" He says, "Well," he says, "you've been hearing these rumors." I said, "Yeah, I've been hearing all that." He says, "I said, well, I just figured I just pass it off, like, you know, well, whatever." He said, "No," he said, I think it's true." I said, "What?" He said, "You know, I think my job's really in jeopardy." I says, "No." He says, "Yeah, Rick." And Mark was truly worried, okay, that his job was in jeopardy just because he wasn't running good. And he sat there and talked a little bit. Now, I finally looked at him. I said, "Mark, let me tell you something. You're one of the best race car drivers I've ever driven against." And I'll say this right now, to me, Mark Martin is top 5 race car drivers that I ever drove against in my 40 years of racing. Of all forms of racing, Mark is top 5, period. No doubt, no question in my mind. That's just, you know, the way it is. Anyhow, I said, "Mark, you're one of the best race car drivers out here, right? Yeah, you're not running good right now. Hell, I'm not setting the world on fire." I said, "But I tell you what, bud." He said, "What?" I said, "I think the best thing could happen would be for Rouse to fire you." "What? What do you mean, fire me?" "Rick, I just got that plane, and you know." I said, "No, no, 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 no. You're not understanding, Mark. If they let you go, if they fire you, you're going to immediately get picked up by a very good race team, and when that happens, the world's going to see Rouse made a mistake here. They shouldn't ever let Mark Martin go." I said, "Because you're going to win races. You're going to be very, very successful." He says, and you know, Mark's very self-depreciated, or whatever you call that word. And he sat there and thought about it a little bit. We talked about it. "I don't know about that, Rick. I don't know." I said, "I'm telling you, Mark, the worst case scenario, they fire you, makes the best case scenario for you. You become a prolific winner in this sport, period. And I don't want to hear any more about it." Right? So, you know, ended up they didn't fire him. You know, they went on being very successful. But, you know, you think, Charlie, honestly, somebody now of Mark Martin's stature, and at that time, Mark was thought very highly in the garage area. You know, he came in the early 80s to what was it, Richmond, sat on the pole with his own car, you know, and had 2 or 3 races. He ran very good. Then he left, went back, regrouped, got his act together, and came back with Bill Davis in the Busch Series, and then Jack. But you think about somebody of Mark Martin's stature, and, you know, maybe he's not good enough and we're going to fire him, right? It's unfathomable if you think about that. So my point being, these guys today, right, They're sitting there questioning themselves. They're questioning their abilities. They're questioning what's going to happen next year. Who's going to pick me up? You've just got to stick. You've got to stick true to yourself and your beliefs that you're good. And you're better than these guys. It's what you got to do. And but that's our sport. That's part of our sport, dude.
All right, let's end on this. What's pissing off Rick Mast today or this week, if you have one?
Charlie, I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't know why this is. Maybe I'm getting older. I just don't have anything making me mad today. Nothing's pissing me off. But if something does piss me off, I'm going to go and I'll do a clip. I'll put a clip on X or whatever on YouTube, and you can follow it up with the Rick Mast Show. But I'm just so friggin' let's see. No, that didn't. I did run out. I was sitting here thinking I got held up in traffic this morning, but that didn't piss me off. It didn't. No, man, I'm good. I am good. I know, and that's odd. That's odd. I got to think about this, Charlie. Man, it's a little bit scary because I'm usually pissed off about something.
But it seems like, and I know you now through this podcast, but it seems like you're pretty happy. It sounds to me, unless you are really such a good actor, these Remington commercials, maybe I don't know, but you seem like you have the right outlook on life. And I think we need more of that. There's too much negativity on TV, on the news, and politics. I like to surround myself with positive people. You seem like you are that type of person.
Man, I hate negative people. I hate it. It took me a while to figure this out in my life. I go away from negative people. You know what I mean? I have my friends, my group of friends, and if they get to talking or they get all down in the mouth and yapping, I'll jump on their ass. I said, don't be acting like that around me. I'm not going to sit here and listen to all this crap. Right? I want happy people. Dude, you only hear a blink of an eye, dude. Be happy, work hard, and treat people right. Richie Evans, what he told me, right? And it's, I think the older you get, well, some people get older and they get grumpier, just old coddlers.
Yes.
And grumpier. Man,
yeah.
I notice the older I get, the happier I get. But the more I want to be around happy people, I think that's why Kenny and I get along so well. Maybe we knew 40, 30 years ago when we met that when we got old, we're both going to be happy people and be buddies. I don't know. But yeah, if you, man, and the problem is with the world and the political arena we got, Charlie, and all the stuff that's going on, golly bum, it's just, you can let yourself get drawn down. You're living paycheck to paycheck, right? Your kid just got a F in school, or they got a drunk driving charge, or whatever. And it's so easy to get in that mode. And I get it. But I just, but let me tell you something, man. I've been through just as much stuff as anybody. Well, not as much bad stuff as people, but enough to where you realize that, you know what, dude, you're only here a blink of an eye. Try to be happy. Just be happy. Just be happy.
I love it.
That's what I like.
I love it. Yes, sir. Me too. Let's end on that note. And for the folks, keep getting your questions in before each show. I'll put it out on X, but also if you want to post your comments on YouTube here, I will grab the good ones for Rick next week. Rick, this was awesome, man. Appreciate it. Honestly, great stories. I love hearing these old school stories. I know the people do as well. So thank you, sir.
Oh, we got books of them, dude. We got a whole book of stories, so we won't run out. Thank you.
Love it. All right. See you later.